here together with Amanda Katil and Sophie Kist to present to you a very important and broader content that you will find during your bootcamp multiple times. It regards the link between food, climate, and innovation. It's very important for all of us, climate shapers, to tackle the climate crisis. We all are aware about the urgency of this issue, but sometimes we can feel overwhelmed by how big is this issue to tackle. So we don't have to be worried. We know that together we can mitigate and adapt to the climate crisis. Amanda and I are a small example of this. So imagine that I am Italian and I was trained by Al Gore, the former vice president of United States, and I was trained by Al Gore and the Nobel Prize for Peace in 2017. And Amanda is from Indonesia. And she was trained by Al Gore in 2008. And imagine that we had the same mentor from Canada. So we are a global family that is coming together to tackle this climate crisis. So I'm very happy today to be together with her. She's coordinated the Climate Reality Project for Indonesia. And I leave the floor to her in order to present you actually the dimension of the problem that we all are here to solve. Thank you.
Hi, hello everybody. If you see Claudia's pin, the green ring, and I also have the green ring, I make it as a pendant. It's called the green ring pin, and Al Gore wears it too. It shows our commitment to address the climate crisis. And right now, there are 31,000 climate reality leaders all over 170 countries, and their age is between 12 to 87 years old. It shows that you don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to be a government official in order to address this very important issue. And maybe next, Claudia, you can introduce yourself.
Yes, I already have introduced myself. I have a background in public affairs, a master in food marketing and in digital transformation and food tech. And I also work together with different associations like the General Forum for Women for the Empowerment of Women.
And like Claudia mentioned, I manage Climate Reality Indonesia, but I'm also a chair of Omar Miode Foundation. It's a small nonprofit organization in Indonesia that tries to raise awareness on local food, culture, and culinary arts. And I used to work for the government as well, but right now I'm full-time managing those two organizations. And like Claudia said, in the next slide, we'll talk about the climate crisis. The climate crisis is said to be the mother of all crises that we are having right now, as we can see next. It's caused by human activities. So human activities is causing the food crisis, also the climate crisis, as well as what we now have, the pandemic or the COVID-19 crisis. But we don't see just the crisis. We have to see the opportunities beyond the crisis, either in terms of economic, either in terms of solution, either in terms of social activities. So although we have crisis, we have to think innovatively and creatively to think about the solution as well. Next. This is the picture that made people realize that we only have one home. That's the blue marble, and it's taken by Apollo 17 in 1972. We realize that everything we do just stays in that Earth. And next we'll see that our Earth, the blue marble, is blanketed by a very thin atmosphere, but lots of human activities are emitting carbon dioxide. And then because of the carbon dioxide, the radiation from the sun that usually goes out back to the atmosphere will stay on the Earth, and it will make the Earth warmer. That's why we have global warming and climate crisis. And we see next, what are the activities that are causing the greenhouse gas emissions? Mostly the man-made pollutions. There is a data that shows we are putting 153 million tons of human-made pollution every 24 hours. So if we compare it to the atomic bomb, it's like we are blowing 500,000 times of atomic bomb per day. Where do those activities come from? As we can see next. Now, those are the biggest sources of greenhouse gases, especially excessive use of fossil fuel and land use change. We see here the industrial agriculture, industrial processes, forest burning, fertilization, land transport, landfill, coal plants, coal mining, and most of them are really very much related to our food system. That's why this class is very important. And next we see the largest source of global warming pollution is the burning of fossil fuels. We see from the 1850 up until on the right part of the graphic, we see the increase of the global warming pollution because of the increase of industrial activities and lots of population also increasing. That's why the use of fossil fuel is also increasing. And we can see the anomaly of the global surface temperature from 1880 to 2009. And there is a 70% chance that 2020 will be the new hottest year ever. And we always say it's increasing. We never see, for example, 1950 or 1960 or 1970 as the hottest years. It's getting hotter year after year. Next, we'll see the cost of carbon. There are lots of gases out from the human activities, but scientists and technologists made an equivalent of all the greenhouse gases into carbon to make it used to speak about, to raise awareness, and to calculate. So these are the costs of all human activities, of all the excessive use of fossil fuel, as well as the land use change. We see species extinction, melting glaciers, famine, drought, storm damage, ocean acidification, infectious diseases, sea level rise, and also the agriculture system is very much affected, thus affecting the food system as well, as Claudia will explain later. But if people are hungry, then you will have political instability, you will have climate refugees, and all kinds of problems that will really disturb the economic and social activities of society. Next, we'll see, this is just some examples. This is what's happening in Baghdad, in southeastern Iraq. Well, the temperature reaches 53 degrees Celsius and also 51.8 degrees Celsius in Baghdad. Now, if you take the words Baghdad out of those pictures, then if you say that, for example, it happens in Indonesia, people will believe it because this is really a global phenomenon. It happens everywhere, as we can see in the next slide. So this is in Beirut, Lebanon, where the temperature also reaches 45.4 degrees Celsius. Again, like I said, it's a global phenomenon and it happens everywhere. This is the Parliament building in Australia. and the temperature was 44 degrees on January 4th, 2020. And if we can find pictures of early this year, we can find things like this too. Again, like I said, this is a global phenomenon. And this is in Amritsar, India, where temperature was 50. And of course, they need water, they need food, and again, it's everywhere. As we can see next, Lahore, Pakistan, 51.1. And if I say that this is in other countries, they will believe it as well. Again, next slide. It's in Japan. That was in Pakistan, in India, Japan also. You can see this is in August 2020, even during the pandemic. So you have to deal with the hot weather as well as the pandemic. And it's really very inconvenient for some people. And 93% of the extra heat trapped by human-made global warming pollution goes into the ocean. And you can really know what's the result if the ocean is really getting hotter. Next, we can see this is a very basic theory that we all learned in school. So the problem starts with precipitation, where water will return to the sea. And then because of the hot water, there will be evaporation. This is the hydrological cycle. If the temperature is getting hotter, then the evaporation will become bigger. And we'll see what happens in the next slide. There will be tropical storm. This is just an example of tropical storm Isaias in August 2020. And it killed at least 9 people and caused $4 billion in damage as it traveled up the US Atlantic coast. You see the round like a cotton. It looks very simple, but the diameter of that tropical storm could be 1,000 kilometers in length. So you can imagine if such storm really hits some areas, what will happen in the area is really disaster. Next, we can see this is in Miami, Florida. Again, tropical storm like the one that we showed earlier, the picture that looks like cotton. It will bring impacts like this. And in Miami, in May 2020, it brought 35.6 centimeters of rainfall to Miami over 72 hours. So 3 days over it rains and it's flood like that. And we do have floods in our country, also in our countries, also in Indonesia. Again, if I take this Miami, Florida out and I said this is in Jakarta, people will believe it. Next, we'll see. This is the data from Hurricane Sandy that happened. And in 1880, if the intensity of Hurricane Sandy light, it happens only 1 in 500 years. In 2017, it happened 1 in 25 years. So Hurricane Sandy intensity, which is very strong. And beginning in 2030 up to 2045, you will have a really devastating hurricane like that 1 in 5 years. It's very unfortunate if we are not taking actions on this. And this is what's called a water bomb in Phoenix, Arizona. Remember that? And this is such an amazing picture that can be taken and showing us how big the water bomb is. Next, we'll see. This is a global record-breaking precipitation anomalies. So remember when we always say, well, at least in Indonesia, we always say, for example, the rainy season is from September to December, and the dry season is in June, for example. It doesn't happen anymore. We cannot predict because there are anomalies like this. And over the years, the anomalies or the difference than the usual is usually getting bigger. You see in the 50s, there are just small anomalies or the big difference between the usual and what's happening. And in 2016, you can see the anomalies. And next, in Korea, also in South and North Korea, this is again showing the impact of the extreme weather. And next, we'll see also in South Korea, it received 20 centimeters of rain in less than 24 hours. It's a global phenomenon. It happens everywhere. And we can see the increase in extreme weather catastrophes. In 1980, compared to 2019, the number keeps increasing. In 2020, if we can put another lever here, it will go up again. And next, this is the statement of Pope Francis in his encyclical letter, Laudato Si. He said that the gravest effects of all attacks on the environment are suffered by the poorest, especially those in poor countries or poor areas will have the gravest effects of the environmental impact. Next, we'll see. I'm almost to the end of my slides, but we can see that the cost of extreme weather events has been $2.5 trillion over the past 10 years. And in the past 3 years, the increase has been $1 trillion. Of course, there's a difference between, this is extreme weather, and then you will see the terms, or you will hear terms, climate change. When you talk about climate, it's weather in a long term, in 30 years time. So the climate is changing when there's a change in over 30 years time. If it's weather, you can just say, well, it's raining today, it's cold today, it's hot today. That's what you call weather. And in the next slides, these are the global systems vulnerable to climate change, because disruptions to this system may lead to political or social instability that I mentioned earlier. The food supply, the water supply, and the global health, like what we are experiencing right now. Claudia will explain later on the relationship about the system and the food system. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Amanda. It was a very interesting presentation that gives us the idea that climate crisis is real and is already among us. You quoted Pope Francis. During the pandemic, Pope Francis said that we thought we'd stay healthy in a world that was sick. Indeed, the pandemic is giving us a very global lesson on what's going on, not only to the planet, but of course to human health. So food is the epicenter of this crisis, and is also the source of the solutions that we can bring, and we need to accelerate on these solutions. We have a framework to work on. The framework is the one of United Nations of the Agenda 2030. The framework is the one of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we have 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and I invite you to take into account these goals also for your hackathon and for the projects you are going to develop during and after the bootcamp. You have a masterclass that I recorded for you that explain the nexus between food and all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So not only the number 2, zero hunger, not only the number 12, responsible consumption and production, but also the entire 17 Sustainable Development Goals. All the goals are related to food and agriculture, which is a vital sector for human health. because climate change is at the end of our fork. This is a quote of Barack Obama that in 2017 during a global summit said this quote, and it's very clear that all of us are affected by the climate crisis and all of us need to eat. So regardless to our social position, to our job, we can make the difference through our food choices. These are the Sustainable Development Goals divided into the three main P of that United Nations defined: the planet, people, and prosperity. So we know that we need to work accordingly to this global framework. And this is the toolbox that Future Food Institute elaborate in order to analyze food that is energy, life, culture, care, tradition, inclusion, fun, and pleasure, to analyze it through 5 different lenses: the food diplomacy, the circular living, the climate smart ecosystem, the food identity, and prosperity. And all these lenses are strictly related to the earth and to the climate crisis. So to be very clear, the nexus between food and climate can be summarized by this sentence: today we eat what we pollute, and we pollute by eating. There is this relation of cause and effect. So we eat what we pollute because, as Amanda said, all the human activities are polluting the entire planet. And of course, the soil, water, energy, all the natural resources are polluted. And we pollute by eating because the food systems are large contributors of greenhouse gases emission. I want to show you this video. This video was created by Future Food Institute in order to show that climate change is real and food industry is largely involved, because it produces 29% of greenhouse gases emissions. And that's why we need to change diet and not climate. So there are solutions that we are going to see now. And solutions come from innovation of the food sector. So we pollute by eating. What does it mean? It means that the global food system accounts for approximately 28% of all global warming pollution. So the way we produce food, the way we transform food, the way we trade, exchange food, we transport food, we consume food, we waste food, produce this very high percentage of warming pollution. And specifically, which are the main sector of food that produce greenhouse gases emission? So as you can see, the first contributor is livestock and fisheries that produce the 31% of methane from cattle digestion, emission from manure management, emission from pasture management, fuel use from fisheries. So the first contributor inside this food sector is livestock and fisheries. Then there is the crop production with 27%. First, crops for human food that are responsible for 21% of food emissions. And secondly, the crops for animal feed. The third one is the land use for livestock, first of all, and secondly, land use for human food. And then the last sector of food value chain is the supply chain, that is divided first for transport, so the 6% of food emissions. Then we have packaging, 5% of food emissions. Then there is the food processing, 4% of food emissions, and retail, 3% of food emissions. So often you can hear that transport is a big contributor. Indeed, it is just 6%. The majority of food emissions are in livestock and fisheries. So globally, the 28% of greenhouse gases emissions derive from agriculture, deforestation, and forest fires. And it rises to 37% if we also count the food industry. So we need to change it, and we can change it through innovation. A very big issue, as you will see during your boot camp, is the food waste. So 1/3 of food production is actually waste. We are speaking about 1.3 billion ton food per year. It's a huge amount of food. And we are wasting the water that we use to produce that food. We are wasting the energy that we use to produce that food. We are wasting the soil. We are wasting the human effort. We also are wasting human rights related to people that work behind the scenes and farmers for sure. So this is an issue that we absolutely need to tackle, the food waste, because food waste produces 3.3 billion tons of greenhouse gases emission. I have here figures for Italy, for instance. We waste 20 million tons of food per year. We should feed 44 million people with this food wasted. At the same time, as I was saying, we eat what we pollute. Because of course, what goes in the oceans, as Amanda said, all the acidification of the oceans, all the pollution that is absorbed by the oceans goes in us. And of course, it's not only for the oceans, but also for all the food that we are producing. Imagine that every 5 seconds, we are losing the equivalent of a soccer field. So imagine how fast it is going, the degradation of the soil. The 33% of our planet's land is degrading and unproductive. So in 60 years, we will find ourselves without soil. And this is a big issue that we need to fix. Innovation, again, can come to us to solve this problem with the controlled environmental agriculture, for instance, or the production of food without soil. But of course, we need to protect the soils that absorbs a lot of carbon emissions. So climate anomalies lead to a reduction in agricultural productivity of between 9 and 21%. So we have seen the causes. We are seeing now the effects. And of course, the climate crisis is affecting a lot the food system, nutrition, toxins, water scarcity, floods, drought, heat, fires, disease, pesticides. All these elements are affecting the food system. So we are living in a planet full of paradoxes. We are living on an obese planet that is dying for hunger. Indeed, we have more than 2 billion people that are suffering from obesity, and we have 80 50 million people, the majority are children under 5 years, that are dying for hunger. We are living on a planet where we have quenched lands. So the 70% of water source is for agriculture. And at the same time, we have people that are suffering for water scarcity. So you can see here that agriculture is the most important sector for the use of water. Then we have the industrial use, and the third one is domestic use. We are living in a world with very high social costs that derives from the climate crisis. We are living in a world of climate migrants. 147 million of migrants are leaving their lands because of the climate crisis. And a lot of farmers, specifically in India, but actually all over the world, are committing suicide because of the effects of the climate crisis on land and agriculture. So we can see that food is fundamental also for preventing the next pandemic, because food, animal, and climate crisis are all interconnected. We need to think about the solutions. We need to think about how to adapt and mitigate to the climate crisis. So the adaptation is regarding the reduction of people's vulnerability to climate impacts and increasing their resilience to the global climate change. The mitigation, lowering the level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and reducing emissions from human activities. How can we do that? You are climate shapers. You are in a class where people come from all over the world. They are from different backgrounds, different generations, and together you can find innovative solutions, and you can implement activities to raise the awareness on this issue and to change for the better. Indeed, what can we do? We need to regenerate agri-food systems. We need to increase the awareness of the nexus between food and climate. We need to transform agri-food systems at all levels. And we need to achieve the SDGs and mitigate the climate crisis one bite at a time. There are practices in agriculture that are considered regenerative: the crop rotation, the no or low-till farming practices, the use of cover crops, the multi-species grazing, the rotational grazing techniques. These are just examples. The nutrient cycling, the planting perennial crops, just examples of practices that are considered as regenerative practices. I want to show you this. These are the results of a research program named the Food for Climate League that gives us tools to better understand how to communicate the climate crisis, how to stop feeling overwhelmed by the issue, stop feeling the anxiety that all the images that Amanda shows procure in ourselves. So the first outcome of this research is that education is not enough. The mistake of assuming that knowledge alone will lead to behavior change should not be made. Because of course, we are here to be trained on climate smart cities, farms, oceans, regenerative kitchen. But we know that education is not enough because we need to transform the inspiration into action. The second learning outcome from this project is that emotional factors are triggers. Emotional factors are very important to actually change a behavior. So we need to stop having defensive emotions, even in people we are speaking to about food and climate. We need to better understand that emotional factors are triggers. And then the entire conversation about climate and food and climate in particular needs to move away from elitist paradigms and become much more inclusive. So here we have some tips, let's say, from the Food for Climate League project. It's important speaking using human truths. It's important to build on current trends, work within the existing culture to facilitate the transition to new habits and generate true habit change. We need to highlight the positives. What does it mean? We need to promote the acquisition of so many new, exciting and sorry, I cannot say this word, culinary experiences, paint a picture of a better world that people will want to live in. It's very important also for the emotional elements, the highlight the positiveness. So we don't need to scare people with what is going on with the climate crisis. We need to understand that it's true, we have not a lot of time to tackle the climate crisis and keep the temperature under 1.5 degree. We don't have time, but at the same time, we can find solutions, and we already have plenty of solutions, as we will see shortly. It's important to be consistent and repetitive, approach new language and behaviors consistently and repeatedly to engage others. Democratize, speak to as wide an audience as possible and challenge your assumptions. Connecting the dots, clarify the impact of food choices on the environment with a simple, accessible narrative. Empowering. This is very important. You need to invite people to participate as stakeholders and participants, empowered to make a difference. Leave room for imperfection. Depoliticize, focus on shared values and avoid common buzzwords that can trigger political identities. Recognize evolution and change given by experience. Consider the diversity of ways people experience the climate crisis. You are in a class of very diverse people, and you can train yourself to actually work together with the different kind of people in order to change given by experience. Being honest, there's no need to avoid the obvious. The climate crisis is scary, but everything we do is significant. This is very important because we don't want, when we highlight the positiveness, we don't want to lie. We want to be honest, and we want to underline that all of us can actually make the difference. So we have seen that we have seen the problems of the climate crisis. We have seen the nexus between food and climate. So food is one of the most higher contributor for climate crisis, and at the same time is one of the most important victims, let's say. So that's why we say that we eat what we pollute, and we pollute by eating. So now we have put in this presentation some example of innovation. So innovation can be a leverage to actually tackle the climate crisis through food. We have 6 main categories where we are seeing actually the future of food, the food innovation in 6 categories that we can take as an examples. The future of proteins, the urban food production, and we need to remind ourselves that the population is growing for sure in the urban areas. The biodiversity conservation, food loss and waste, transparency and traceability, novel food production. So we put here some examples because we want you to be the people to innovate the food value chain. And you can do it also with the inspiration on something that already is occurring. And in this case, food innovation is also a business because it's growing a lot, the return on investment on these categories. So this is a purpose-driven business because it also supports to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and to tackle the climate crisis. So here you have some examples. I will leave you the presentation so that you can go deep in these examples. We know that meat and dairy industry is among the top 5 biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, CO2, methane, nitrous oxide. So we need to find solutions. And we also need to change behaviors in order to consume less meat. There is the in vitro meat, for instance. We have the pioneer of cultured meat, the Professor Mark Post, that discovered that cell culturing and existing medical technology could be applied in the food industry to create animal meat products. The application of this technology in animal tissue production can reduce environmental impact and ethical concerns of meat production dramatically. He is in the Netherlands. So this is one example that you can also find in the books Food Shapers on our website, because Future Food Institute organized a global mission in 2018 to find these food tech hubs all over the world. Of course, the plant-based mimics is one solution that we can see in the future of proteins. The Impossible Foods mission is clear. They want to preserve the culture that goes with cooking meat, but firmly states that the way livestock is produced today is prehistoric and destructive. So this is one example, Impossible Food, of plant-based meat. There also are the insect and microbial protein that is rising a lot, and also the flour made by insect is rising a lot. There is the urban food production. As I said before, the global population is increasing. The pressure on arable land to increase productivity. And so there are different solutions to produce food without soil. And also we have aerofarms, aeroponic indoor farms. You all know the vertical farming, for instance, and you all know the techniques, the controlled environmental agriculture, that is a system that can save water, and of course soil. There is the biodiversity problem that we are tackling, let's say, because there are 20,000 edible plant species in the world, of which 90% of our food comes from less than 20 crops, of which 66% is only from 9 crops. So we are eating all the same crops, but we should enlarge our horizons and rediscover the biodiversity of our planet in order to not incentivize the monoculture in the world. So in this presentation, I have put other examples, like for instance, a startup that is called Fungi Express. So they are growing mushrooms from coffee waste and package into a desirable consumer product. There is this other example in Iceland named Kerecis that develop fish skin products to heal human wounds and tissue damage. There is the category related to traceability and transparency. So we are assisting to the increasing of blockchain, for instance, to trace back food and immediately understand where the food comes from. So there are different apps using blockchain, like for instance, TE Food. There also are sensible city labs in order to prevent disease. There is the novel food production. So I don't want to overwhelm you with all these examples. My point is that innovation already exists in the food sector in order to regenerate a sector that is producing the 30% of greenhouse gases emissions that are contributing a lot to the climate crisis. So all the references about these examples are on our books, Food Shapers book series, available on foodshapers.org, divided into Future of Proteins, Agro-Innovation in Smart Cities, Food Care, the Future of Food Service, Scalable Sustainability, and Circular System. So there is hope because we are assisting to a very mindset shifts for organization transformations. We are seeing that plenty of organizations are shifting their mindset from profit to purpose, from hierarchies to networks, from controlling to empowering, from planning to experimentation, from privacy to transparency. We already are assisting to this transformation of organization. And for sure, we as a Future Food Institute, we are trying every day to apply all this knowledge that we have shared with you on a daily basis. We are trying to make the difference with the vision of our president, Sara Roversi, that is working together with the whole her team in order to regenerate food systems and to build prosperous, trivial communities through different projects that we have also with United Nations, like the bootcamp you are attending. It's important to understand that no one alone can tackle the climate crisis. We need to do this together. That's why I share with you the tips of Food for Climate League. That's why I share with you some examples of how we can actually communicate with the others and being empowered to work in the same direction, knowing that food is at the end of our fork. So join those who are using their voices, their votes, their choices to fight the climate crisis, because your world depends on it. I want to see your faces now because I have spoken a lot, and I really want to see if everything was clear, and of course I remain at your total disposal if you will have some questions, if you want to deep dive into some concept. I see that everything was clear. Give me, okay, perfect. Very happy to see your faces. And now I would leave the floor to Sophie from the Glasgow Declaration. I really thank her for being with us. Because food policies are super important to tackle the climate crisis. And where is Sophie? I cannot see her.
I'm here.
Here she is.
Claudia, I think Anmol has a hand up. I just want to make sure if there was a question for you that maybe before I start to talk and get launched.
Yeah, just a small question, actually. Thank you for the presentation. It was really impressive to kind of see that presentation and see the innovations also happening. I come from a developing country still, and I had that one question where, a lot of people, when I talk to them, often sort of ask me as well that, how can we think about climate so much when we need to develop a lot? While climate sounds great for a lot, it sounds very good for you, but it may not for me. And another thing, that climate change is more a Western concept. How do we kind of talk about climate change in a country which still needs to develop a lot? And it's a very complicated scenario as well. You spoke about crop burning, but what's happening in India right now is you have a lot of farmers protesting. I don't know if you've heard about that. A lot of farmers.
Sure.
They are actually farmers who do a lot of crop burning as well. So it's very complicated to kind of balance out the two as well at some level. Yeah,
yes.
That's my
thank you so much, Anmol. This issue is also included in the Al Gore's movie An Inconvenient Truth. There is the Indian government that when they were signing the Paris Agreement, were actually underlining the same problem that you are pointed out. Of course, it's a priority that we need to tackle. So it is true that developing countries see the developed countries in a different way. You had the chance to develop yourself with the fossil fuels. Now that we need to develop our economy, we cannot use the fossil fuel. But we have alternatives. we have a technology that once the developed countries started developing themselves, there weren't. I'm thinking about renewable energy, for instance, that in India is also rising a lot. So the point is that nowadays we have a technology that once there wasn't. So developing country can have different business models, can have different kind of development. They can actually develop themselves in a different way. And we have access to technology nowadays, so the costs are even lower than in the past. I don't know, Amanda, if you agree or if you want to add something.
Yeah, I just would like to add some little information. Claudia mentioned the Paris Agreement. That's where all the countries agree on what to do to address the climate crisis. And it reduces the dichotomy between developed and developing countries. And then, of course, in the Paris Agreement, there is also what they call the nationally determined contributions. So each country will decide on what they do to reduce the carbon emission. But then, of course, there are calculations, and countries will gather and then said that, well, your NDCs or national determined contributions are not enough, to reduce the emissions. So that's why there are global negotiations, because the climate crisis is a global crisis where we need a global mobilization of resources to address it.
Thank you, Amanda. And we need, as Amanda was saying, it's a global issue, and we need an holistic approach. We need a systemic thinking. That's what we are talking about with Sophie. And some of you already have some session with Xavi, and you will go deeper this methodology to have a systemic thinking that is required actually to tackle the climate crisis. Sophie.
Thank you so much, Claudia. And that's actually a perfect introduction, I think, to what I want to start the session with. But also just thank you for that fantastic presentation, both of you. That was really so much information. I'm blown away by what you managed to present to us in an hour's time. And it hopefully what I'll present with our work on food policy and the Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration builds well on this. But let me just handle the tech first and try and share my screen. Hopefully you are now seeing the presentation and not my notes. Is that right? Or do you see?
We can see
your notes
too.
Oh, you see my notes. Right. Does anyone, let me see how I solved it.
I think, Sophie, is it PowerPoint or Google Slides?
It's a PowerPoint.
Okay, so you would need to leave this view now and then just print on, click on presentation. So you would need to close this view.
Okay, so if I stop sharing?
No, in PowerPoint, you would need to first go into the presenting mode, but then I'm afraid you won't see your notes.
Okay, so if I go into presenting mode and I come back to you.
Mm-hmm.
How's that?
Yeah, now it's perfect.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Claudia, for the help. So my name is Sophie Quist, and I work with a Scottish food policy organization called Nourish Scotland. And thank you so much for inviting me to join. I'm really inspired to be among all of you and see this amazing work you're doing and really driving change in the food system in relation to climate change. That's also what we do at Nourish. We work with and campaign for a food systems approach to food policy that integrates these often siloed but very interrelated policy areas like agriculture, nature, biodiversity, and health. My own background is in human rights and food policy, And a lot of what I do is facilitation and convening and bringing different people together. I work specifically on projects related to COP26, the UN climate negotiations, which are going to be held in Glasgow, so in Scotland, in November. And that's why we're very involved with this year. And over the past 12 months, we have worked with the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, IPES Food, to draft and promote the Glasgow Food and Climate Declarations, which is what I'll talk about today. Perfect. So the Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration is a commitment by subnational, so local, regional, city governments to tackle the climate emergency through integrated food policies, and a call on national governments to act. And this is part of a broader process to move food systems up the agenda at the coming Conference of the Parties, which builds on the Paris Agreement that Amanda was just outlining before. At COP26, countries will have to reconcile their current climate commitments with this much more significant transformation that is still needed to tackle climate and nature emergencies, as Claudia and Amanda just perfectly outlined before. And as their presentation demonstrated, to do this, we really need food systems to be part of that. And we need a food systems approach. So I won't spend too much time on going into this nexus between food and climate, because we've already had fantastic presentations on it. But I will say this, just going off from what Claudia said about how we really need positive narratives. I think our imagination for what the future can look like is so important in this space. And this is an infographic we usually use to talk about why we need a food systems approach to climate change. And I just want to start by saying, you know, we can turn this on our head and say, yes, food systems contribute around 1/3 of total greenhouse gas emissions, but it also holds so many solutions. The food systems hold the key to tackling the climate emergency, to promote health, to secure livelihoods, to regenerate nature and communities, and to increase our resilience. And so in my presentation, I would like to introduce you to the declaration, to our plans for COP26, and to talk about why integrated food policies are an approach that we are promoting. I guess it's kind of policy innovation, and why we promote that in relation to tackling climate change, and to illustrate what that means in practice. And I want to start doing that by playing a small game with you, because I've already talked for long enough, and I'll talk more. So I need to just get myself back to Zoom.
I can share the link to the...
Can you share the link? Fantastic.
Yes,
so,
of course, no problem.
Thanks, Claudia. I've got too many things going on my screen here. So if you open the link to go to Google Jamboard, that would be fantastic, and I will meet you in there. Awesome. So we're going to play a small game that'll get us thinking about food systems. I'll go to the next board in a minute, so if everyone can follow me then, and then click on this icon out here on the side and create a sticky note with your name on it. And then make it smaller so that there is space for all of us. And I invite you in this session to unmute yourself in Zoom, not to talk, but just to unmute yourself so we can kind of hear the sounds, if you feel comfortable, that come across when you do it. So if you could do the sticky note, not in this board, but on the next one in here. Fantastic. And then please give it a color so that we have a good spread of different colors.
Yeah, shall we share the Jamboard on the screen, or do you want to go through first the instructions?
It's best actually, you can, share it. You can share it on the screen as I'm talking, but if everyone can come to Jamboards rather than Zoom, I think that works better.
Yeah, all right, then if you don't mind, I will stop your sharing and share the board so that the audience can see what we are working on.
Fantastic,
yeah?
Okay. So if anyone, so I can't see the chat and everything at the same time. So
I am here. I will be your second eye. So if something is coming in the chat, I will let you know.
Otherwise, feel free to just unmute yourself and talk to me if you're having issues. But otherwise, please create a sticky note. I see a couple of sticky notes in the first board. Could you, at the top, just move to the second slide, which is the blue background, and then create your sticky notes in here. And just make sure that we have a few different colors. So I'm just going to make myself yellow. Okay, I see we are 9 of us, so we're probably missing a few people. Fantastic, welcome in. Feel free to add your own name, or you can add another name if you want. It doesn't have to be you. Fantastic. If this isn't working for you, by the way, feel free to also just observe, but hopefully it's relatively simple. And I'll just, while you create your last sticky notes, let's spread out a bit, and I'll give you the instructions. So what we're going to do now is everyone is going to choose 2 reference points on this board. The rules are that one of the reference points has to be pink. Okay, one of them has to be pink. The other one can be anyone, not yourself. None of them can be yourself. It has to be 2 other people, 2 other sticky notes. One of them needs to be pink, and the other one can be anything except yellow. Okay, so 2 reference point, 1 pink, another one just not yellow, and not yourself. And so some of you will have to make your own notes yellow. That would be good. Great. When you've chosen your reference points, I then, when I say go, want you to move so that you are at an equal distance. Please move slowly. So you can move by clicking on your sticky note and moving it across the board. Please move slowly so that you are at an equal distance from both of your reference points. So for example, I might choose, let's say that I choose Pauline and Anne. I would then move myself here so that there's an equal distance between myself and Pauline, okay? When you move around, please do it slowly. And just because of the way that Jamboards work, please remember to drop your sticky note. Otherwise, we won't be able to see it moving. So we're going to try that in a minute. I might intervene at some point. So if I say all stop, just all drop your sticky notes where they are and come to a move. Of course, if your reference points moves again, you will have to move with them so that you continue to be at an equal distance from both of your reference points. Are there any questions? Just shout. Oh, and I see some of you are drawing lines. So if we can try and just stick on the sticky notes tool. Okay, any questions or any sort of, does it sound good?
Can you please repeat what we have to do with the colors?
Yes, okay, so everyone stay the colors you are. Choose 2 reference points. They can't be yourself. One of them should be pink. The other one can be anyone except a yellow one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but how can you reference?
So reference, okay, that's a really good question. I'm just thinking, just choose 2 names on the board. And the meaning of reference is that when you move, you are moving in relation to those points. Does that make sense? So if I choose here, I'm Sophie. If I choose Anne and Pauline as my 2 reference points, when I move, I want them to be at an equal distance from me. So I might move here. Does that answer the question? Okay, so let's try. Has everyone, I'll just give you a second to choose your reference points. And when I say go, move yourself, your sticky note, so that you are at an equal distance from each of those reference points. If they move, you have to continue to move to keep this distance. And we'll see if it works. Okay, everyone choose your reference points and go. Okay, everyone come to a stop. So just stop where you are. Fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to intervene. So if you just drop your sticky notes where they are, I'm going to intervene and I'm going to move you, Pauline. I'm just going to move you over here. When I say go, do exactly as before, move yourself to an equal distance and let's see what happens. Thank you. Go. Okay, thanks everyone. Just come to a halt and I will see you back at Zoom. So I'll come back so I can see everyone's faces. Everyone, please come back to Zoom. Paula, yeah, thank you. So feel free to unmute yourself. And I'm just going to ask as a starting debrief, can anyone tell me what just happened on the board? Just feel free to unmute yourself and come in.
It's a similar exercise. Hi, sorry. Now we're talking double. So go for whoever else unmuted.
I just wanted to say it's a lot of movement and you're just focusing on like the two you were chasing, and I was not able to see the others. I was just following the other, like the two, my reference point, and that's it.
That's a really interesting reflections. So what caused all the movement?
The movement of the others.
Exactly. So what we effectively just did was we created a system, right? So whenever everyone was connected to someone else, and when someone moved, what happened? Everyone else moved as well. So the point of this, I'll go back in a second. Actually, I want to ask just one more question. And because we are a bit short of time and there's a lot of us, maybe just reflect on this, but thinking back on the presentations just given by Claudia and Amanda, can you think of a real life example related to food and climate change that behaves like this? You move in one place and other things shift. And I think the reflection you just highlighted, that I'm just focusing on my own two reference points and I have no idea what's going on in these other parts of the system. That's a really interesting reflection. I'm going to come back to that when I return to my presentation. So I invite you to kind of stick with that and just hold that reflection in your mind. If you have any other reflections on this exercise as I go through the presentation, feel free to pop them in the chat, or you can also go back on the Jamboard and write them on your sticky note. Perfect. Are there any quick sort of reflections from the group before I move on, or any questions? Cool. Then in the interest of time, I'm going to just come back and see if I can share my screen again and not show you my notes. Does that look good, Claudia?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. So the point of this exercise was to illustrate that food and climate are complex and interconnected systems. And I've brought a map along with me that kind of shows that in relation to food in particular. And when we think about food in that way, we learn that every outcome is a result of a structure. And that means that to understand and solve problems related to food and climate from a policy perspective, we need governance. And by governance, I'm talking about rules and regulations and strategies and the bodies that make them. We need those to understand and reflect that complexity. Now, governance, however, is often absent when it comes to food. In many places, the responsibility for food policy or for policies that affect food systems are split across different departments in government, whether that's agriculture, health, labor, environment. And that means that each of these departments, a little bit like this reflection on, I'm just focusing on my reference point, you set agendas based on their different goals. There's this tendency to engage in our own sectors or our own levels and focus on our immediate priorities. And that's, of course, that's important, but it means that often when we don't explore the wider system, there is a deprioritization of these crucial links that can be made between different departments and the opportunities that can allow for. So for example, a colleague shared this with me recently, the food and drink industry here sets targets for 2030 for their development that relies on greenhouse gas intensive products. And policy coherence here would be about setting targets in food and drink that are aligned with those in climate change and inequality and in health. So taking a food systems approach through this policy innovation that we call integrated food policies allows us to consider that these different problems are interconnected and create coherence. And the relation to climate change is that unless all of the food system's different impacts and outcomes are considered together, the climate change strategies that are associated with food systems are likely to be inefficient. And we can think back to the game of that. If we don't know where we should move to shift what we want the outcome to be, we might not choose the most effective policies. And I think really important to this, and hopefully this also reminds me of your question from before, Amol, is that to understand these different elements of the food system, we really need to listen to all the people who have a stake in the food system. And that means having an inclusive and participatory governance process too. So this is another great figure that illustrates the transformative potential of integrated food policies in relation to all the SDGs, and shows how when we join up governance of land, of agriculture, of climate, of diets and health, then we can meet all of the sustainable development goals. And so that's why the Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration calls for integrated food policies. And that means horizontally across policy areas, but also vertically across different levels of government. So national, state, rural municipality, city, all these different levels. And this vertical integration is really important. I just mentioned trade above, and trade and competition laws is often stuff that's decided at a national level, but it can block or fail to incentivize local governments who want to, for example, engage in very integrated policies around how they buy food. So it's important that we don't just speak across different departments, but also across different levels of government. Fantastic. And this work, the Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration, brings together subnational actors of all sizes and of all geographies across the world, because we have seen that cities and regions are really leading the way in pioneering food policy innovation. And also because, as was raised earlier, there is a great diversity in what's actually needed on the ground. So it's important that those voices are brought into the climate policy space. A great example to illustrate a bit what we mean by integrated food policies is Mousatou in France. Mousatou is a signatory of the Glasgow Declaration, and their policy brings together urban and rural planning, organic food production, and livelihoods and education to create food system sustainability. And they have made all of their 3 school kitchens and public canteens, 100% organic, and at the same time reduced food waste by 80%. And all of this is kind of resting on integrated governance that brings together farmers and citizens and teachers and different people working across the city. Another great example is the city of Quito. And this really illustrates the role of inclusive and multi-actor governance in enabling food sustainability. So Keto brought together in the Agri-Food Pact people from across the food system to address interrelated challenges of climate resilience, sustainable production, or access to safe and healthy food. And the outcome of this process of bringing together people from all over the food system was the Keto Food Charter, which will be the foundation for inclusive and integrated food policy. And you can see here that it brings together food waste, it brings together how we will ensure access, and how we will ensure sustainable livelihoods for farmers and food producers. And then I wanted to finally give an example that's a bit closer to home for me. So this is the case study of the Good Food Nation in Scotland, which is what we are campaigning for here with Nourish Scotland and our colleagues. And the Good Food Nation is an example of an integrated food policy that is grounded in the human right to food. And the human right to food itself takes the systems approach, looking at sustainable food, looking at access to food, looking at the livelihoods for all the people who work in the food systems, and of course, a human rights approach. And so the way this would work would be a Good Food Nation Act, a piece of legislation that puts the right to food into law, and ensures that we have a nation where food is good for people, for animals, for nature, and for communities. And in terms of governance, this would require an independent food commission that can ensure policy coherence and facilitate participation of diverse actors in the food system. And that could be translated into cross-cutting food plans and targets in different sectors that are all joined up, for example, on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from food or on reducing household food insecurity. And then And that takes me back to the Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration, because based on these different case studies and the examples we're seeing of the local action, COP26 is a unique opportunity to bring not only the link between food and climate to the international negotiating table, but also the vital role of local and subnational governments. So the Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration is a pledge to take this action to adopt sustainable integrated food policies, but also a call to national governments to align their policies with what's actually needed on the ground. We drafted the declaration together with IPRIS Food, as I mentioned, and a host of different organizations who have become involved in the process and are working with cities and municipalities and states to sign the declaration and take action in the space. The declaration was launched in December 2020, so last year, just a year to go to COP with our early signatories. We now have over 30 cities and subnational actors who have signed. And it was really exciting at the launch to see, as you can also tell from the quotes here, just how much cities and subnational actors really see this link between climate change and food and are very ready to take action, but also need incentives and need support from the national and international level. And so I think I will finalize with a bit of time for questions, hopefully, and maybe some discussion, with an invitation to all of you to join this movement as climate shapers through this program. And there are, of course, several ways you can do this in relation to the Glasgow Declaration. Ask your local government to sign, maybe work with setting up a sustainable food policy partnerships. If you are part of an organization, then please join us as a supporter, and you can follow our work at the glasgowdeclaration.org. Perfect, and I will stop sharing there.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I was just thinking when I was putting this together, Claudia and all, that I will share these slides so that they are available with you. And I will also put in the final slide in with some resources, because some of our partners have produced amazing reports and case studies and example, not just about how cities and subnational actors are doing this, but also what actually makes it happen. What makes these policies happen, what makes them work, and some of the work that we're doing around, including in particular farmers. I didn't really get to mention that in my presentation, but thank you so much, Anmol, for raising the protests that are going on at the moment, and this extremely important point of not alienating farmers when we're talking about food policy. It's so important to bring those in at all levels of governance. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Julia, the director of our digital bootcamp, for all the support she gave to Sophie. We have just 5 minutes actually to conclude this session. I hope you enjoyed it. Do you have any question for Sophie?
I think Renzo raised his hand.
Yes. First of all, best of luck for your endeavor. It's very powerful, and I liked the roadmap that you shared. I would like to think about one element that I haven't heard, and I would like to ask you and also Claudia, the other speakers, about the impact of activist organizations. So how much this organization can be, let's say, along the line of your missions, or what kind of impact do you see in climate change? So there are many organizations that also try myself to join, but I would like to know your experience in terms of how this could be strategically impactful for climate change, in your view and your experience.
I missed, just because you mentioned a few names, Renzo, but I will answer. This was directed at me and the Glasgow Declaration.
Yeah. Initially, yes, and then it could be expanded to other speakers, Claudia or Amanda too.
Fantastic. I will answer from our perspective first then. So activist organizations, and I hope I answer your question. There's always a little bit of, I give you an answer based on what I understood, but local organizations and community groups and activists have been hugely instrumental in how we have reached our signatories with the Glasgow Declaration. So just to give an example of that, here in the UK, we have networks of sustainable food partnerships that are made up of groups of different community organizations. They can be activist groups that do urban agriculture or community gardening or work with climate or work with various different topics that go together and form a partnership with the local authority. So there's this mix of policymakers and activists, and often these activist groups are then the ones who are first in contact with us and say, we want to use this declaration as a tool to raise awareness with our local authority about the importance of integrated food policies and COP26 and what we can do as a city. So I think these partnerships are really important, and activist groups play a huge role in that from our perspective. I hope that answers your question, but I'd love to hear from Amanda and Claudia as well.
Yes, Renzo, thank you for your question. It comes in my mind what a friend of mine, Giuseppe Savino, that is a farmer in the south of Italy, always says to me, we need to shift from the protests to the proposals. So as soon as the climate activists are able to propose solutions, not only to protest against something. This is the approach that we have at Future Food Institute. We are not against something, we are for someone and something. We have here in the class, you have Putito Ruggero. He is a climate activist. He's just 13 years old. And he was alone in his tiny city, protesting like Greta Thunberg was doing with the climate strike. And now he is with us because he wants actually to shift from the protests to proposals. And as soon as you propose, you can have a lobbying actually power for the food and for the governments. You can write letters not only to show what is wrong, but also how we should do to be right. This is something that I personally try to keep in mind as a climate activist. I try to empower my community. I try to give opportunities. I try to transfer knowledge and also my network, my everything that I can to empower the others to act. We are in the decade of action, according to United Nations. So it's the time to talk is finished. We need to act now.
Thanks. Yeah.
I would just like to continue with some information. Many years ago, it's only the government who are doing the work in addressing the climate crisis. So they're called the state actors. But right now, the role of non-state actors are already recognized. Non-state actors include NGOs, interest groups, women, youth, children, indigenous peoples, and other groups. And they are also recognized in the Paris agreements. And they are also given opportunities to voice their opinions in international climate negotiations.
I would have a question to Sophie, if we can continue with one more or two more questions. And that's about your declaration received by local governments, because I'm based in Berlin and it was shocking for me to realize that there are independent and not connected departments for food, climate action, and waste management. And for me, they are all very interconnected, yet these entities are making their decisions completely separate from each other, and I don't see any change in this. So how did you see when other cities were signing your declaration? What is that maybe suggestion or proposal or first step what you would suggest for other cities and municipalities?
That's a really good question. Yeah, how do you, so I guess a lot of our signatories are actually cities and places that are already very active in that space and that have their food policy and their food policy councils and have been working. But I did have a really interesting conversation with someone who's actually working in another German city council, who is looking to have her city sign the Glasgow Declaration, and was saying, you know, I'm seeing now that I bring in food and I bring in food and I say, let's talk about food policy and climate change. And all of a sudden, people in these different departments start to find space for working together. So I think what we have learned actually from sharing the declaration is that this declaration itself, and I don't know if you've all had a chance to read it, but I think a link was put by Claudia in the chat, so please do go have a read. But it can be a tool for starting those conversations and starting this work across different departments. But I think what's really important as a next step for us in the run-up to COP is to create space for that dialogue actually, and say, how do we start? How did cities start? And what can we learn from each other? I think one of the things we're hoping for here in Scotland is to have this independent food commission, or a cross-cutting body that will bring together people from these different ministries. Because as you say, it is quite siloed often.
Thanks a lot. I think that time is running very fast. So thank you all for your attention, your reflections, and thanks a lot to Sophie. Thanks, Amanda, and thanks, Julia, of course. And we keep in touch very soon. Thank you to the audience that is following us on Facebook. Ciao. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.